Compared to the first three Mauryan emperors, we know surprisingly very little about the Mauryan emperors who came after Ashoka. In this video, we will try to construct the history of the Mauryan Empire after the death of Ashoka. So when it comes to the history of the later Mauryan emperors, we find that we have two types of sources. So first are the Puranic sources and the second are the Buddhist sources. So we will start with the Puranic sources first. So in the Puranic sources, we find that several Puranas mention the later Mauryan emperors, and in these Puranas we find that the list of later Mauryan emperors is provided. So let's look at these lists. So first we have the Vayu and Brahmand Puran. So in the Vayu and Brahmand Puran, this list is mentioned. Then there is also another Vayu Puran which provides us this list. Then we have the Matsya Puran which gives us this list. And finally Vishnu Puran provides us this list. Now in all of the Puranic list, you can see that all the lists are different from each other. But we find that all of the Puranas agree on two facts. The first fact on which these Puranas agree is the fact that the last Mauryan emperor was Brihadrath and he was killed by his own general Pushyamitra Shunga. We know about it. And then the second fact on which all Puranas agree is the Mauryan dynasty lasted for 137 years. This fact is quite important for us because we know that the first three Mauryan emperors ruled for a total of 85 years. So we know that Chandragupta ruled for around 24 years and Bindusar reigned for around 25 years and Ashok's reign lasted for around 36 years. So that means the first three Mauryan emperors ruled for a total of 85 years. So this leaves us with 52 years. That means the later Mauryan emperors rule for a total lasted around 52 years. This is quite important for us because when we try to analyze the Puranic list, we find that in some Puranic list, if we combine the total reign of all the later Mauryan emperor which is mentioned in the Puranic list, we find that in some lists the total number of years is more than 52 and in some list it is less than 52. But in no list we find that the number is exact, that is 52. So that means in some list names are added and in some list names are subtracted. So there is a problem with the Puranic list. So let's look at the Buddhist sources and see whether they can tell us something else about the later Mauryan emperors. So we have mainly two Buddhist sources. The first is the Ashokavadan which provides us this list, and then we have the Divyavadan which gives us this list. Now in both of this list you can see that the last Mauryan emperor which is mentioned is Pushyamitra. Now we all know that Pushyamitra was not the last Mauryan emperor. He was actually the general of the Mauryan emperor Brihadrath. So that means there is also a problem with the Buddhist sources. So how should we solve this puzzle? So what I suggest is we should proceed one ruler at a time. So we will look at the ruler who came after Ashoka. So we will start with the Puranic list. So in the Puranic list, we have Kunal, and then the different Vayu Puran gives us the name Kunala. So we can all agree on the fact that Kunala is a corruption of Kunal. So that means Vayu Puran, Brahmand Puran and the other Vayu Puran tells us that after Ashoka, Kunal became the Mauryan king. Now in the Matsya Puran, the ruler which is mentioned is Dashratha. In the Vishnu Puran, it is Sueshas. So basically we have three names. First is Kunal, second is Sueshas and third is Dashrath. We will start with Kunal first because Kunal is a quite important figure in the Buddhist sources. And we are told from the Buddhist sources that during the end of Ashoka's reign, Takshila again revolted and Ashoka sent Kunal to quell the rebellion. Now when it comes to Kunal's life, there is a text called Kunal Sutra. And Kunal Sutra is quite important because Kunal Sutra was composed in the region of Gandhar and Kashmir, where the Buddhist sources tells us that Kunal was sent to quell the rebellion. Now in the Kunal Sutra, the story which is provided is different from the Buddhist source. Kunal Sutra tells us that during the end of Ashoka's reign, the Gandhar ruler died. and all of the Gandhar people decided that they want to come under the rule of Mauryan Empire. So that is why Ashok sent his son Kunal to govern this region. Now there is a truth to the story which Kunal Sutra tells us. We find that during this period, the Bactrian Greeks revolted against the Seleucid Empire, and this led to the frequent incursions of the Bactrian Greek into the Indian subcontinent. And we find that the Gandhar region was their primary target. So it could be true that the Gandhar region and the Gandhari people were quite affected by the raids of the Indo-Greek, and they decided to come under the control of the Mauryan Empire. Now there is another source which provides us a different story. This is Rajtarangani. Rajtarangani tells us that after Ashok, a king named Jaluka came to the throne. Now, when it comes to Jaluka and Kunal, we find that there is no similarity between the two names. But when we try to write both of these names in Brahmi, we find that it could be the case that some scholars confused Kunal with Jaluka. We should also consider that Kalhan was writing his Rajtarangani some 1400 years later after this incident. So there is a possibility of some confusion. So that means it could be the case that after the death of Ashok, the northwestern part of the Mauryan Empire was divided. So here we can see that this western and northwestern part of the Mauryan Empire became a separate entity, and it was ruled by Kunal. So what happened to the eastern part? So when it comes to the eastern part, we should again go back to the Puranic list. So in this list, we know what happened to Kunal. So two names which are remaining is Sueshas and Dashratha. Now when it comes to Sueshas, some scholars argue that when Kunal became the ruler of northwestern part of the Mauryan Empire, he changed his name from Kunal to Sueshas. This practice of changing name after coronation was quite common among different dynasties in the ancient Indian period. So we can assume that this might have happened. Now when it comes to Dashratha, we know for a fact that there are inscriptional evidence which proves that Dashratha existed. But the question remains that when did Dashratha become the Mauryan emperor? Did he become the Mauryan emperor after the death of Ashok, or he became the Mauryan emperor sometimes later? Now, to answer this, we find that when we analyze the inscriptional data, we see that the Brahmi which is written in the inscription which was commissioned by Dashratha is quite similar to the Brahmi which was in the Mauryan inscription of Ashoka. So this suggests that not enough time passed between the inscription which were written during the Ashokan period and the inscription which were written under the reign of Dashratha. This means that after Ashok, Dashratha became the Mauryan king, and particularly of the eastern part of the Mauryan Empire. We have also seen that in the Matsya Purana it is mentioned that Dashratha became the Mauryan king. And when we exclude the Sueshas name, we find that Vishnu Purana also tells us that Dashratha became the king. Now one question which remains is why Dashratha is not mentioned in any Buddhist sources. To answer this, we have to go back to the inscription of Dashratha. In this inscription, we are told that Dashratha had donated these caves to a sect called Ajivika. And some scholars argue that because Dashratha favored Ajivika rather than Buddhism, he was not included in the list which was prepared by the Buddhist sources. So now we know that after the death of Ashok, the Mauryan Empire was divided between the western half and the eastern half. The western half came under the control of Kunal, and the eastern half was ruled by Dashratha. Now one thing we should keep in mind that this is a speculation. We have arrived to this conclusion by using limited sources which we presently have. It could be the case that in near future or the distant future, some new sources could give us a completely different picture. So we should always keep that in mind. Now in the next video, we will discuss the story from where we have left, and this video will be posted here. And if you want to know more about the first 3 Mauryan emperors, consider watching this playlist. Thank you for watching.